So it's my privilege to introduce the first Feliciano-Rozycki lecturer, who is Kevin Burns, our president-elect. Kevin is Vice President for Medical Affairs and Dean of the School of Medicine at St. Louis University. He's a summa cum laude graduate of the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. He attended the Mayo Graduate School of Medicine and completed his general surgery residency training at the Mayo Clinic in 1995. He was an assistant and then an associate professor of surgery at UNC in Chapel Hill from 95 to 2005. From July of 2005 to 2009, he served as chief of the Division of General Surgery, vice chairman, interim chair, and in July 2009 was appointed the Edward R. Woodward Professor and chair of the University of Florida Department of Surgery until October of 2016. His clinical interests are focused on benign and malignant pancreatic and biliary disease. He has a national and international reputation as a pancreatobiliary and oncologic surgeon. He's a co-investigator on NIH-funded projects that study chronic liver disease, ischemia reperfusion injuries to the liver, mitochondria dysfunction, and hepatocyte autophagy related to liver injury. He's president-elect of the Halsted Society and of this society as well, and he's a co-editor of the journal Surgery. So Kevin, I welcome you to the program. Looking forward to this talk.
Thank you, David. I thought we might use a little different format, so we'll be very conversational here today and really live history. This is really a great pleasure for me to be able to deliver the inaugural Feliciano-Rozycki Historical Lecture. I really want to thank David and Grace for their contributions to the Southeastern Surgical Society and for their long support for this organization and for making us a collegial, welcoming, and inclusive organization. So another round of applause, please, for David and Grace. Thank you very much. As I was instructed, I put the hashtag up there, so those that tweet, please get the word out about this lecture and the contributions of David and Grace. This is really about their contributions. So as I was thinking about a topic, I thought, how do we really live the Southeastern and this meeting and what we do throughout the year? And for me, as an editor of a surgical journal, the written word is important. So I thought I'd look at the history of our journal, The American Surgeon. And so we're going to take a dive into that this afternoon in the next 30 minutes. And the reason this is important, because we're a learning organization. You know, I tell the residents and the students, you know, if you want to learn about something, you can go read about it. If you want a little bit more in-depth knowledge, come to the podium and present it, because you'll get questions and you'll be challenged. But if you really want to commit to a topic, write about it. Write about it, because it's there for eternity. So let's take a look at how we've documented our success of the Southeastern Surgical through the American Surgeon. So the format for this is I divided it up into some eras. And that's the 30s to the 50s, when we weren't the American Surgeon as a journal. We were the Southern Surgeon. And I'm going to show you some citation data, but I could only get data going back till 1946. And then we're going to look at the eras, 50s to 70s, 70s to 90s, 90s to 2006, and then we'll look at the recent history. So the journal started as the Southern Surgeon, 1932. The editor was L. Minor Blackford. The journal wasn't published for a couple years around World War II, and there was no editor from 46 to 47, but Dr. B.T. Beasley served as the managing editor. And you can see the advisory editorial board on the right, and if you look closely at the small print, you can see the cost of the journal at $3 a year. So pretty inexpensive. After Dr. Blackford's term, Dr. Irving Abel Jr. took over from 48 to 50. He was a son of a famous surgeon. He went to medical school at Yale University. He was a graduate of the he did his undergrad at Yale. He was a graduate of the University of Louisville Medical School. He was president of the Kentucky State Medical Association. He was president of this organization from 40 to 41. And he's buried at Calvary Cemetery in Louisville. So that was the era of the Southern surgeon. And you kind of have to put this into the social context, the 30s to the 50s, right? There's a huge effect on medical care from the Depression. In the medical context, people were worried about polio, anesthesia, sulfa drugs, etc. And so when you go back and you look at the citations of the Southern surgeon from that time, you can see that I've listed only the top 5 cited journal articles from 46 to 50. And you can see that they had varied topics, but most of them were published in the late 40s. So that reflects the content of the journal and of that time. If we go forward a little bit, now when we look at the era from the 50s to the 70s, we see that the first editor in the 50s was Thomas G. Orr. He was a University of Missouri graduate, and he went to medical school at Hopkins. He was a pancreatic cancer surgeon, which intrigued me because I thought, boy, that's got to be tough in that time frame. And he was chairman of surgery at the University of Kansas Medical Center for 25 years. He was a charter member of the American Board of Surgery and president of the American Surgical. He was succeeded by George Yeager, who was a vascular surgeon at the University of Maryland, which was also his alma mater. He helped establish shock trauma. He gave service to the country in World War II and rose to the rank of brigadier general, fairly accomplished. He went on to become an administrator at the University of Maryland. He had numerous programmatic achievements and really was a giant at the University of Maryland for his contributions to that institution. So if we look at the era from the 1950s to the 1970s, people were talking about organ transplantation, immunology, heart surgery, carotid surgery, endoscopy. And you can see the citations there and the year that the articles were published and the title, and you can see the number of citations. Look at the number of citations for an article on necrotizing fasciitis. It must have been the only article out there on it, right? Everybody was cited. Let's take a little bit more recent look and look from the 70s to the 90s. And the editor, one of the editors was Dr. Mansberger from 74 to 88. He too was from the University of Maryland School of Medicine. He was chairman of surgery at MCG. He was a general surgeon. He wrote about intraoperative endoscopy. And he was a director of the Board of Surgery as well. He was succeeded for 1 year by Dr. Carreri, who was a University of Pennsylvania medical school graduate. He trained at South Alabama. He was a trauma and burn surgeon. He was interested in the hypermetabolic response to injury. And he was a AAST president from 89 to 90 and president of the ABA. So you can see from the 70s to the 90s, the topics in the literature were the artificial heart, minimally invasive surgery, test tube baby, right? And then you can see the citations that came from the American surgeon on the right. And interestingly, a lot of these were in the 80s and 90s, and you can see that intra-abdominal compartment syndrome as a result of aortic aneurysm repair was a popular paper. In 1991, Joe Bowden became the editor. He too received his degree from the Medical College of Georgia. He was a general and vascular surgeon, and he did a lot of his practice at the VA. He was also an Episcopal priest. If we look at the citations from 1990 to 2006, again, now a lot of us know this very well, right? Minimally invasive surgery. What about hand and face transplant? NISQIP, this was also the time of the first female president of the ACS. And you can see the citations and the topics in the right-hand table. And again, if you notice, we're very clinically oriented in our journal, The American Surgeon. This is a journal that documents what we're doing on a daily basis in our home practices. Now let's move to more current times with our current editor, J. David Richardson. He's received his MD degree from the University of Kentucky School of Medicine. He's the chief of surgery at the University of Louisville Hospital. He's been president of the college, the AAST, the Southeastern, and the Southern. And you can see that in more recent times we've talked about robotic surgery, safety, quality, the human genome, IT, stem cell therapy, etc. And you can see our more recent publications about the role of blood glucose in the intensive care unit. What about laparoscopic single-site cholecystectomy? You can see that we have a number of important papers. So one of the ways I thought that we could get a better glimpse of how the American surgeon really reflects our society would be to ask David to come and join me on the stage so that we could have a little interview and he could tell us about his experiences as the editor of The American Surgeon. So please welcome Dr. Richardson. Thanks, David. I really appreciate you being here and taking the time and really making sure that the American Surgeon reflects the Southeastern. So I thought, as you look at the content of the journal over the years you've served as editor, tell us what you think the content reflects and how that's a reflection on the Southeastern.
Well, I think the content's still clinical by and large. Just for the record, I made a decision when I took over we were not going to do rat papers. Papers on experimental animals I don't accept. And I did that unless they're a part of the Gold Medal Forum. And so they're clinical papers. Frankly, I like readable papers. I am so sick of big database stuff I could puke, and just page after page of stuff. And the truth of it is, for the young people, if you think about it, if your numbers are large enough, then everything becomes significant. 0.0004 is different than 0.5 or 5 if your numbers are big enough. And it may not be at all clinically relevant to anything. So to me, readable papers are actually important. I think the historical things we try to do are sort of interesting. I think people like those. We've had a problem recently in that we've got a backlog of papers that we need to get published. So for those of you who are in that backlog and logjam, I apologize. And we're trying to correct that. The council's trying to correct that, and we're working on that literally today. I think the review papers we've done have been good, and I think we also had a series of things where we were looking at medical schools and medical centers in our region, because they change so dramatically. If you think, you were in Florida, now you're at a different place. Chairs change, programs change, and so I like things that are sort of readable, and all, because I like to read.
And because the journal is really the face of this organization, tell us how you handled papers from this meeting and from the organization.
Our goal is that if it can be transformed into readable English, with my help, it gets published some way, somehow. And I think we've done that in virtually every paper that's ever been presented in some way. Now, to do that, especially with all the kiosks around. I mean, you know, there's hundreds of things there now, and there's some neat stuff there, but you can't publish all of those as regular manuscripts. So we've developed an online thing, which many journals are now doing. Many journals, in fact, there are several journals where the whole journal's online. We still do have the option of a print journal only, but we try to publish everything that's here and present it at this meeting. And sometimes the papers need a little bit of help just in syntax, but we try to get that done. And so to me, we owe it to the people who attend this meeting, residents, students, people who put their heart and soul into perhaps their first attempt at ever trying to put a scientific thought or a clinical thought together, that we owe it to try to get that in press if we can. So my view is very different than a lot of people. I'm not an elitist when it comes to journals. If you think about it, what are the great ideas that have come forth in the last 20 years in the world of surgery? Endoscopic stuff, certainly that's been good. Most of that stuff did go through big rigorous trials or have big database stuff. Laparoscopic cholecystectomy got turned down by everybody until finally some GYN journal picked it up in France. And then there's been argument ever since as to who did the first one and who cares. But at any rate, the point was it wasn't an American, and it didn't, when we started it in this country, none of the major journals would publish papers on it, which was to me, it was a huge arrogance in terms of at least being thoughtful. And to me, sometimes you ought to let readers decide where something's meaningful or not instead of letting just a few editors do. Endovascular surgery, anybody know how that got started? How long it took Juan Perotti to find somebody to publish that? You know. And so who knows where good ideas are going to come from? And the notion that you got to have 10,000 people in some NTD, beta, where everything is significant or nothing significant, to me is sort of meaningless. So I think the journal ought to be readable. It ought to be reflective of the group. It ought to be, like we talked about with inclusivity today, it ought to be inclusive as we can make it of the papers presented here, including our poster papers. And I'm proud that we've been able to do that.
Yeah, thanks, David. So on a personal level, what does being the editor mean to you? How does being the editor fulfill all the things that you're doing, and what's the space that the journal holds for you?
I'll tell you, it's a lot of work. It isn't what I imagined it was going to be. Philip Burns and Philip and I are great friends, and Ken and we were all great friends. And Joe just wanted out. I mean, Talmadge bowed and Joe bowed. And I mean, he'd done it for quite a while. The thing I didn't know was that the Midwestern Surgical, which was one of our major contributors, dropped out. Nobody told me that. And so I called Joe. I said, how are we doing for inventory? And he said, well, it's going to be interesting. He said, you've got 2 months of things. And then he said, I have 5 papers I'll send you in a cardboard box. And that's, swear to God, that's where we started. And so we've really come a long way. Our rejection rate is very high. It's not that necessarily want to do that. So that's why for this group, the rejection rate's virtually 0 unless you're really bad. And I don't know what really bad would be because they've never rejected much. We've always made it, and we've had to work at it sometimes, but we try to make things publishable. We get a huge amount of foreign things and whatnot. So it's a fair bit of work. And the one thing that doesn't work with this journal, and I've never edited another one, but I'm on a number of editorial boards, and I saw the way that Hiram Polk at the University of Louisville, Hiram, I don't think he edited anything. I mean, him no disrespect. I mean, what he did is it just was all farmed out to people. You can't do that. There's some of this stuff you got to do yourself. Syntax, we get an awful lot of foreign things where it helps to have, different language skills than I have, being a hillbilly, you know.
So maybe tell us what you think the future of the journal is, what you think about the online publication, et cetera.
Well, online is where people want to go. It's interesting, people like print when it's their print. When they've got a paper they want to take home to show mama or their wife, and mama doesn't want to get on the internet. She wants to see something in press. I would suspect in the future that they'll probably that print may go away. It's interesting. I'm a horse guy, and for some of you know, and I'm on a 5-person trustee of a thing called the Blood Horse, which is the official record of magazine for thoroughbred horses. And every time we do so everybody says, oh, Print's dead, Print's dead, Print's dead. Blah, blah, blah. Every time we do a readership survey, half the people still want print for a variety of reasons. So I don't know that that's going to persist in surgery or not. A lot of it's cost dependent and whether member benefit and how you cost things out. So I think online versus print's going to be a decision the organization will have to make. And do we do everything online and do away with print? Content's king. I think our content's good. And all it's if you look, and I look at all the journals now for a variety of reasons. I actually try to read some of them, but I look at a lot of where papers come from. And you know, the world's flat kind of thing in surgical journals as well. And so there's increasing pressure. I have as many international submissions as I do U.S. submissions. And Turkey, huge number from Turkey, Japan, China in particular, but from other countries as well. And many of those are extraordinarily variable quality and all. Many are well written. The Chinese in particular, there's an organization that does a great job of converting that to beautiful English, some of the best written papers. But often it reflects work that would have been more typical of America 50 years ago, sometimes.
So if somebody from the audience asks you, you know, I have so much material, I can only read so much. Why should I read The American Surgeon?
Well, for one thing, it's good reading. You know, I mean, it's readable. You know, I mean, how many pages of data do you have to? I mean, you know, it's just we have readable stuff. Most of our, I mean, we do have data. I don't mean we don't have data, but I mean, I'm amazed at how many papers anymore are just reams and reams of stuff that to me is totally nonsensical. And they come to conclusions that don't in any way match my clinical observations because they're databases, they're not observational kinds of things based on large practical experience. Dr. Feliciano and I were talking about that the other day. There's all kinds of things that appear statistically significant, but either they're insignificant or they don't make sense with your clinical experience. So I think we have a very readable journal. And to me, I'm sort of one of those balls to the wall, all in, full tilt boogie kind of guys. That's just me, always have been. And so to me, if you want to be in an organization, you want to support an organization, you do it. And the way you do it, it's what Ken Sharp said. It's what you do. It's part of you. You make it part of you. And part of that's read the journal, buy the journal, where it's in print or online. I mean, if you're a member, you're going to get it online. If you want to show it to mama or your kids. See, my children, the online stuff doesn't impress my kids at all because they, you know, but it's interesting. My children are very impressed with anything I do, but like most children. But at any rate, if they see something in print, they actually think, well, that must be something. But anybody can get online.
Yeah, so we only have a minute or two left, and so what would you say to the young surgeons in the crowd about how they can get involved and how they can really use a journal as a vehicle for development of their academic career?
It's no telling how many people it's the first place they've ever published. We're we're open, inclusive, we want your publications. It's not just from this meeting. I will tell you, and I'd say this absolutely unashamedly, and it's probably immoral, but if you have I told David yesterday, David sends a lot of things, has his residence from Medical University of South Carolina. If I can publish them, I publish them all, don't I? And you know why? Because that's us. That's this organization. Frankly, I try to do the same thing with Southern Cal if I can, because we publish the Southern Cal things, and those papers are good, but every now and then one will fall through the cracks, and it doesn't get. And if they're part of that Southern Cal chapter, and it was presented at their meeting, but their recorders decided that it isn't worthy because they have some page restrictions, I try to publish that if we can, because again, they're part of our family. They're the South, even though it's.
It's out there. It's out there. So just before we conclude, there are several people I want to thank. Jessica from the Journal was really helpful to me, so I really want to thank Jessica. I can imagine that on a daily basis you are the beneficiary of her great work.
She's an extraordinarily good person and really does a great job for the Journal. And it's fascinating. She used to come to the meetings. She hadn't been in the last couple of years because her presence hasn't been needed. But she really cares about the Journal. Yeah. And she cares. Interesting, she's developed this thing about the organization itself. So if I get a little behind on something, and I don't get, I don't mean to sound immodest, I don't get behind on much, but sometimes reviewers do. She's there pushing, say, we got to get this paper reviewed. She does a great job.
She's terrific. I want to thank the library staff at the St. Louis University School of Medicine. I only showed you 5 citations from the various eras. I have every citation from the American surgeon in files in my computer. So if anybody wants them, I'd be happy to share them, because there's a ton of great work that we could do out of that.
One more brief comment.
Yeah.
No, I've talked too much now. I apologize. But first paper on Dacron graft use for treatment of aortic femoral disease was published in American Surgeon. And its authors were, first authors, Michael DeBakey, Denton Cooley, George Morris, who else would it have been? All of them. Stanley. And so when it came time, I decided, 50, let me look and see what was happening 50 years ago. It's about 4 or 5 years ago, what was happening. So I pulled out the first journal. Lead article was this Michael DeBakey thing. And of course, typical Houston kind of thing. They'd been doing these 2 years and done about 500 of them. And so I called Dr. DeBakey, who at that time was, very senior. And so Dr. DeBakey wrote a history of how he came to do about he went down to the department store and tried to buy nylon, and they didn't have nylon, but they had some Dacron for some reason. Took it home, sewed it on his wife's sewing machine and whatnot. And then I called Denton Cooley. I thought, and this was about the time that the come together was coming together. But I called Dr. Cooley, and he wrote the thing. And it was a masterful thing. It was the last thing that Dr. DeBakey ever wrote before he died. He died about 3 months later. So to me, to have things like that, to be part of the heritage of your journal, is a pretty cool thing.
That's a totally cool thing. I want to thank Margie and Jill and Tim Farrell, because as you can see, we have a little bit of an unusual setup, and all I had to do was ask, and it showed up. And then finally, David, I want to thank you for your willingness to participate and your insights. And most of all, I really want to thank David and Grace. Thank you very much.
Thank you.